Mike Tomlin's talked about wanting mobile quarterbacks in the past and the advantages that has. Would one have more of an advantage in Arthur Smith's offense? We asked that question as well as answer your questions from the Locked On Steelers hotline right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, with Alan Saunders today. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Make every moment more at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 off or $150 back in bonus bets, by winning any $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As I said before, we're joined by Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. We had Nick Faribault on recently, so naturally, Alan's going to be right around the corner. We're going to be partying it up in Indy next week, so I'm excited for that. We're both going to the Combine, but before we get to draft talk, I wanted to address some more questions. As always, there's people who call into our show, Alan, 412-223-6633, or no, 6644, 223-6644, to call in for the show. Leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute. And we've had a lot of callers piling up, so I'm trying to get through all these calls, especially before the Combine. And we had a caller, CC Ryder, all the way from Portland, Oregon, had this question on the quarterback situation.
Hey, Chris, it's CC Ryder from Portland, Oregon. Thanks so much for taking the question. Love your show. Just wondering what you thought for Mason Rudolph, how much Mike Tomlin is concerned about his overall mobility, and maybe more importantly, how concerned should we be about his lack of mobility and ceiling. Thanks again for taking my call. Take care.
So thank you, CC, for your call there. Alan, I want to talk about this a little bit because Mason Rudolph can move. Like, he's not a statue. He's not fast. Like, he's not gonna, go Lamar Jackson on anybody. He did run over somebody in that Lions game back in 2021. That was actually one of the better quarterback runovers I've ever seen. But when I look at the Steelers quarterback situation in Arthur Smith's offense, is having a more mobile quarterback sort of a necessity to make it work? Because Tannehill wasn't super mobile when he was in Tennessee.
No, it's not. In fact, it might be the kind of offense that requires the least quarterback mobility. I mean, you're going to hand the ball off a lot. When you're not handing the ball off, a lot of the time it's going to be play action. And so there's not a whole lot of stand your ground, read the defense, then have to be like athletic enough to make a guy miss or to step up and to escape the pocket. And like, that's not really what this offense is all about. I don't really think it requires a lot of athleticism. Went back and did some numbers. Ryan Tannehill ran for 266 and 270 yards in his 2 years with Arthur Smith as the offensive coordinator. That's nothing impressive. Now, Marcus Mariota did run a good bit with the Falcons in 2022. He ran for 438 yards in only 13 games. But then back to last year, again, Desmond Ridder. And again, we're talking about maybe Mariota is the best athlete of those three, but none of these guys are Lamar Jackson, and none of these guys are statues. They're all kind of average athleticism quarterbacks. Ridder didn't hardly run at all last year. So it definitely doesn't seem like it's required. And honestly, it feels like this could be a spot. Like, if you're talking about an aging quarterback that has maybe limited mobility, I'd be trying to sign up for an offense like Arthur Smith, except for the amount of time they go under center. I don't know, late in Ben Roethlisberger's career, he was not real keen on going under center and using play action where he'd have to turn his back to the play. But outside of that part of it, I think really it's about that part of comfortability in turning your back to the play, reading the pass rush, feeling the pass rush sort of organically, more than it is about athleticism. I don't know that straight line speed is the answer there. There's been plenty of fast quarterbacks that were bad at feeling the rush and plenty of not particularly mobile quarterbacks that just found a way to never get sacked too. It's almost like it's two different skill sets. So I don't see a lot of need for quarterback running, for a quarterback to be able to be a dual threat in that way. But, any offense, but I think especially this offense does require a quarterback to have good pocket presence, be able to feel a rush and navigate the pocket and get the ball loose, especially being under center and turning your back to the rushers a good amount.
Right. And I feel you on that. I think part of what the Steelers need to understand, but people need to understand about the Steelers is that the Steelers aren't looking for a quarterback that has the biggest arm in the world or the fastest legs in the world. I mean, it'd be nice to have either one. They're looking for a quarterback that's going to play this system, that's going to be able to handle smart decisions at the right times and not try to play outside of it, that could be well coached into it. And I think that's one of the things that you kind of need. Jordan Love, one of the compliments he got from Nick Bosa before the Niners and Packers play was that guy pays attention to what you coach him to do. And when he plays to the system. The Steelers need a quarterback who's going to start next year, who's going to play that system, whether it's Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett, Justin Fields, whoever it's going to be. They need someone who's going to be able to understand, like, hey, on these plays, these are my reads. This is how quick we need to get the ball out. These is where my eyes need to be. And this is what I need to understand about pre-snap reads and things like that. Whoever is the most heady quarterback at doing that is going to be the key. Not as much mobility, not as much size. I mean, size is kind of important, but I think that's what people need to look at. And I think that's another reason why, I steer away from the Justin Fields thing. And I know you and I have talked about this before on this show. You've talked about it on your show for SteelersNow.com, the afternoon drive. But, I think that's the thing here is that the Steelers, people thinking the Steelers need to make some grand, drastic move. I think the opposite here because of what they're going to be trying to do on offense.
I'll go even a step further than that. They have this offense because they know they're not going to make a grand, drastic move at quarterback. This is the offense that you get when you know you don't have great quarterback play. You're probably not going to have great quarterback play, and you want to have a good offense anyway. This is the system that you go pick because you know you're not going to do that. And so, if the Steelers had intentions to go take some big swing at quarterback this offseason, they would not have hired Arthur Smith in the first place. That would have been a terrible decision. They hired Arthur Smith because they want an offense that could work with just average quarterbacks like Ryan Tannehill. That's what they've got in Kenny Pickett. That's what they're likely to get if they bring in another quarterback besides Kenny Pickett, whether that's Tannehill himself or someone else of that ilk. They're not going to have above average to good, better than above average to good quarterback play this year. They know that. They're trying to succeed in spite of it. That's why they have Arthur Smith. And that's why, I don't expect them to make some big swing at the quarterback position. It just doesn't fit what they're telling us with their actions about what they intend to do.
I noticed you said Pickett, you said Tannehill or someone else. Do you rule out Mason Rudolph as part of the future here? Or do you think that he actually still could be in the fold still?
I guess I'm not going to rule anything out, but it doesn't make any sense to me from either side, right? If you're Mason Rudolph, why would you sign back up with the Steelers and think that they're going to give you a fair shake when they haven't ever really, but like consecutive off seasons? Mason Rudolph has been in training camp with Kenny Pickett and was never even considered to get playing time. In fact, basically the Steelers didn't want to play Mason Rudolph until they absolutely had no other choice but to at least try him and see how it went. I don't know why he would sign back up for that. It's clear that the Steelers brass does not think very much of Mason Rudolph as a quarterback, or they would have gone to him before they did. And so I don't know why he would want to play for the Steelers. If the options that are not out there, maybe there aren't, maybe he goes around and looks and there's not really a job that he really loves. And maybe he'd be willing to come back from Pittsburgh, maybe. But why would the Steelers wait to let that process play out? If Mason Rudolph's not going to re-sign with the Steelers before free agency, then they need to be signing someone in the first 1 hour of free agency, whether that's him or not. They're not going to wait around at this position for him to make his mind up. Could they bring him back as the third option? Yeah, I guess. But I really don't know why he would want to do that.
Right. Back to where he started.
There's too much working against it for me to think it's very likely. I won't rule it out, but it just doesn't seem like it has a lot of reason to me to work.
I hear you on that on his part. It's why I've been telling Steelers fans for a while now that I don't know if Mason Rudolph's going to come back. Like everyone's saying, like you got to just start Mason Rudolph over Kenny Pickett. People saying, oh, the team is torn over this right now. I'm not so sure that the Steelers know that Mason Rudolph's coming back. Like we're both saying here, like if I'm Mason Rudolph and I can get a job anywhere else, I'm gonna take that if I think I have a chance to start. It's clear that Steelers haven't given him that chance. Now, granted, I'll say this as a counterpoint before we move to the draft talk at the quarterback position. I do think that after this past year, if the Steelers sat him down in his exit interview and were like, look, we admit we've been wrong about this, and next year it really is you and Kenny even keel. Go, you two guys are going to go after it in training camp. But like you said, if I'm Mason Rudolph, why do I buy that? I head to free agency and I see what I take my chances elsewhere.
Yeah, if I'm Mason Rudolph's agent, I'm like, do not go back to Pittsburgh. Go literally anywhere else. Literally anywhere else. Don't go back to Pittsburgh. That's what I'd be telling you if I was his agent right now. And so I just can't see it happening. Maybe it can. I don't know. But I don't understand it for either side. Like, I can't see the Steelers being the team to offer him the most. And I don't know why he would think it would be the best fit. New scheme. It's not like he has any attachment to Arthur Smith, or Tom Arth, no connections to any of those guys. It just seems like it's time to move on for both parties. I think the Steelers would rather have somebody else anyway. I do think there's a significant advantage if they can find a quarterback that is more familiar with the scheme. One of the big reasons the Steelers brought Matt Canada back was they did not want to have to deal with having Kenny Pickett learn a new offense. It is difficult. Like, I don't want to undersell the difficulty there. If you bring in your second quarterback and you don't need to teach him anything and he already knows it all, I think that's a big benefit. So a guy like Marcus Mariota, a guy like Taylor Heineke, if he gets cut, which it seems like he's going to, a guy like Ryan Tannehill, I think brings a significant benefit to the Steelers. And I think all of those three guys are better quarterbacks than Mason Rudolph anyway. So, like, why wouldn't they just do that?
That's certainly a question that will be answered in free agency. We'll talk about questions about the draft here in a second on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. There's always great chances to win on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers to FanDuel get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. If you're like me, football season being done doesn't mean I'm done with sports. FanDuel gives you so many ways to play with NBA, NHL, college basketball, and so much more action that's going on every single day. There's a whole bunch of ways to win on FanDuel, and not just different games, but also different bets you can make. You can make quick bets. You can make live same game parlays. You can get exclusive prop bets and so many other ways to find your winnings on FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers join today and you can get $150 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. We take back to the call-in lines. Again, we got a lot of calls. They've been calling from everywhere. I got like 30. I think I'm down.
Everywhere thing continues to. I'm aware that Steelers Nation is everywhere, but when I get comments and I talk to people, it's like, oh yeah, I'm from Utah, I'm from Idaho, I'm from Arizona. I'm like, man, it's awesome to see just how far-flung Steelers Nation is. It blows my mind every time.
All right, this next state is really random. Name it. Can you guess which state this call is coming from?
I don't know. Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Ooh, you were in the region, Nebraska. Tim from Lincoln, Nebraska. Take it away.
Hi, this is Tim from Lincoln, Nebraska. And I've heard a little bit of news about some people suggesting that the Steelers actually could pick a QB in this draft coming up. I've heard the names of J.J. McCarthy and Bo Nix, and I'm curious to see if you think we get the center we need, JPJ, in the first round, and we get to the second round, and one of those two QBs are available. Do you think we might take a shot at one of those guys instead of maybe getting a tackle or safety or linebacker or something. Love the podcast. Thanks a lot. And I'll listen.
Thanks so much, Tim. Appreciate you calling in. Again, 412-223-6644 to get all your questions on the air. Alan, I've talked about Bo Nix a lot on this show already. I'm like, Bo Nix is basically doing another shot at a Kenny Pickett type quarterback, a guy who's been in college football for a long time, a guy with very similar build, who found successes last year. Though I'll say Kenny Pickett, I think, won some bigger games, considering he's an ACC champion, and Bo Nix lost a lot of big games in his time in Oregon. And not that Bo Nix was a bad college quarterback or anything like that, but I don't see the appeal there. JJ McCarthy is one that I am surprised how quickly he's risen. Like, it seemed like going into the end of the season, everyone looked at JJ McCarthy like, okay, it's great that you won the national championship, but we're gonna you're not going to be one of the top quarterback picks. All of a sudden, you got people like PFF putting him in the top 30 in their big boards and stuff overall. Do you believe in any JJ McCarthy hype as far as a quarterback?
Well, I'll say two things. One, I don't really think anybody has any idea how good JJ McCarthy is because Michigan played nobody and never threw the ball even when they did. Secondly, JJ McCarthy is a top 15 pick, 100%. No,
you think he's not even going that high?
He's not even going to make it to the Steelers in the first round, let alone the
wow,
second. No chance. He's going that high. Two things happen. One, well, here it's two effects of the same thing happened, right? When you got through the season, it was very clear. Caleb Williams, Drake May, first, they're going top three. There's no choice. Those guys are not top three picks. And Jaden Daniels, generally considered that third best quarterback, probably somewhere between 4 and 10, right? Is where you figured that he would go. JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix were widely considered to be that kind of next group. And there wasn't really a lot of separation between those three guys at the end of the season, right? And Bo Nix and Michael Penix went to the Senior Bowl and were as bad as they could possibly be in the week at the Senior Bowl. I watched Kenny Pickett and Mac Brown be the best quarterback at the Senior Bowl in consecutive years. And compared to what Kenny Pickett and Mac Brown did, who, by the way, have been miserable failures as first-round picks as NFL quarterbacks,
you mean
Bo
Mac
Nix
Jones,
and Michael
right?
Penix looked like 8th graders on the JV team. Like, they were horrendous at the Senior Bowl. Horrendous.
Yeah.
Like, no one has spoken about either of those guys in the first round for 1/10 of a second since that week in Mobile, and it's not going to happen. JJ McCarthy, on the other hand, just saw his stock rise by default because he wasn't there, right? And so now it becomes clear, if you want a quarterback, these are the only 4 options. And so now teams are going to be jockeying to get ahead of themselves to not be left holding the bag and not get a quarterback. These quarterback-needy teams that are not drafting in that top 6 or 7 are going to pick JJ McCarthy early because they don't want to be stuck with what's left later. I would not take Bo Nix in the second round. I would not take Michael Penix in the third round. I don't think either of them is even going to be average NFL quarterbacks. I think they stink. And I don't understand the fascination with either of them. JJ McCarthy, I don't think anybody has any idea. You are just taking a wild swing at a completely unproven product. I wouldn't use a first round pick on him. I think like if he fell to the Steelers at 20, they should be looking to trade down and get somebody to pay a lot of money, pay a lot of draft picks to come up and make that, and let somebody else pay to come up and make that pick instead of making it yourself. Because could he be good? Sure, but nobody has any idea, and I don't understand. Like I don't really think much of Jim Harbaugh's like tactical acumen as a head coach, but I got to think if he had a really good quarterback, he'd have thrown the ball more than he did.
I feel you on that. On the last point there, my thoughts go to this. With the quarterback situation, I expected all along Williams, May, Daniels, they're going to be gone long before the Steelers pick. If JJ McCarthy's in that mix, then that's about 4 picks now that are going to be in a position to steal. Like the Steelers want a quarterback, but they're not going to get any of those guys. So now you're talking about 16 picks between the Steelers that'll go to other positions.
Pushing quite a few of those corners down the board, man.
That's really great value, man. Like that's what the Steelers kind of want. Like if you're in the situation,
you can sit there and look at the group of tackles and look at the group of corners, and you can say, okay, there's 100% chance one of Taliesin Fuaga, J.C. Latham, Amarius Mims, Tyler Guyton, Quinyon Mitchell, Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry, One of those guys is 100% are going to be there at 20. And those are all really good first-round picks at two vital positions needs for the Steelers. You don't usually get tackles that good that late in the first round. You don't usually get corners that good in the first round. You throw in Wiggins and DeGene there too. I think they're probably less likely. But you're going to get one of those guys to fall to the Steelers at 20 because these other guys are lined up for quarterbacks. They're lined up for wide receivers, stuff the Steelers don't really need. I think the draft is going to fall pretty well for Pittsburgh, but I don't think it's going to happen at quarterback. Again, that's why Arthur Smith is here.
So I ask you this question. If Jackson Powers-Johnson is sitting there along with a J.C. Latham, do you still just go offensive tackle or do you consider the center from Oregon?
I think I would take tackle before center every time. I just don't think that center is as impactful of a position as tackle. I think there are centers out there that can do the job decently. There are more average centers than there are average tackles, right? You can go find a guy like an Aaron Brewer in free agency who's going to make, I don't know, $7 million a year or something like that. You'll find an average tackle and you got to pay him 15. It's a lot easier to address center in different ways. And I think the Steelers really, really, really want to lock down their offensive line, and I think this is how you do it. You go tackle. I really think that it's a great year to want. It's a great draft class to want to tackle. It's probably the deepest tackle class I can remember, at least in the last 4 or 5 years. There's even good tackles into the second round. A guy like Patrick Paul from Houston would be a very good pick if they want to go take Jackson Powers-Johnson in the first round, or they want to take Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback from Toledo, in the first round, and then they go tackle in the second. I think that's very possible, but I expect the Steelers to go lineman heavy early. I think they could go 3 straight linemen between the offense and the defensive line if things fall the right way. I think it's a very, very, very solid trenches group. I'm not enamored with the quarterbacks at all. I think the Steelers are well on their way to defining how they want this rebuild to be remembered, and I think it's with Andy Weidel in the trenches.
I think it could very well be an interesting draft class that solidifies the trenches. And I've been saying this for a minute here. Before we move on to our next segment, Alan, I've been of the opinion that if the Steelers lock things down this year, draft that offensive line, figure out cornerback, and then even find that defensive lineman for the future, that could put them in the position, especially if they pay guys like Pat Freiermuth and Najee Harris to stick around, to say like, all right, next year's the year you go into quarterback. But that's also a peculiar position because next year's draft class at cornerback isn't singing so loudly as this one. There's no Caleb Williams or Drake May that pop up. Like Shedeur Sanders is going to be one of the bigger names in that group. But they could also be in a position to maybe trade for a quarterback in that situation. Like if there was a Justin Fields type player next year, that could be a situation to work itself out. And I think that with the way that Steelers are building, if they figure it out this year and they figure that Kenny Pickett still isn't the guy after this next season, that could be the time to make their big jump at quarterback.
I'm always leery of those like way early projections. A lot changes over the course of a senior year. I remember, when we were talking about this year's quarterback class, a year ago, yes, people were talking about Caleb Williams, and yes, people were talking about Drake May, but in that same breath, people were talking about Quinn Ewers, and not here at all. And so, I think it's too early to have an opinion about next year's draft class at quarterback, but I wouldn't let that play into my thought process. I do think the Steelers are a year away from any kind of big decision at quarterback. They want to give Kenny Pickett another shot in a different offense. And again, I just think this offense is built to not need elite quarterback play. That is what they are trying to do. And so I think, if they get it, great. They're not going to turn it down if they get a shot at one. But I don't think it's a priority for them right now. I think they're trying to fix the rest of the squad and get the rest of the team in really good position. And then if they get there, then they make the Chiefs Patrick Mahomes move, right? Where our team is already good. And then we're going to go get the quarterback to make us great. I think that's the point that they're trying to get to.
I agree, because if people think that, the Chiefs, they sucked and then they got Patrick Mahomes. They were a good team. They had just lost to the Steelers in the playoffs That year, they had the 27th overall pick, traded up to get 10, and got the franchise quarterback. That's why I'm saying that, like, hey, if they solidify everything else, there could be a time to make an aggressive move. But we got to switch topics. When we do, we got another question that's going to be about the tight end position. That more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, taking your questions here on the Locked On Steelers hotline. We got Parker from Indianapolis who wants to ask about the tight end situation. Take it away, Parker.
Hey, Chris, this is Parker from Indy again. Just a question for you. It seems like the last few Super Bowls have featured top-flight tight ends such as Travis Kelce and George Kittle in the last Super Bowl. Do you think an Arthur Smith's new scheme that Pat Freiermuth can take the next step and become a top-flight tight end that can lead us to the Super Bowl? Thank you.
Thank you, Parker, for your question. And thank you, everyone who calls in with questions. Sorry for those who won't get to right away, but we do have a lot of questions that always come in. But, Alan, the tight end usage, there's some people out there that probably say, like, no, because look at what he did with Kyle Pitts. But I also point to be like, you know what? Look at how much tight end heavy formations he also used with the Falcons, and I've covered that on this show, going over 12 personnel packages. The Falcons became one of the highest users of that type of formation, and the Titans were up there with using it among the most when he was the offensive coordinator there. What kind of jump do you see in production for Pat Freiermuth, or do you think there's a jump at all?
I'm not sure the jump is from Pat Freiermuth. I think we're going to see Pat Freiermuth still continue to be very good. Where I see the jump is Darnell Washington. You know, I think if you're one of those people that was pounding the table and said, "Wow, the Steelers use this big guy more," you know, like the beef in Atlanta was that he did not use Kyle Pitts, and like his offense is much more well suited to a traditional inline blocking tight end that can also get loose on play action and find seams in zone defense than it is this like flexed out, tweaked up athlete like like he had in Atlanta, right? I mean, I don't think that Kyle Pitts was ever a good fit for this offense. It was a bad fit from the beginning. I think one of the underrated talking points about Arthur Smith's failure in Atlanta is that they had 3 straight top 10 picks, and they drafted a big wide receiver that he did not have a quarterback that could get the ball to, a tight end that didn't fit his offense, and a running back that he didn't need when he had no quarterback, no offensive line. You know, it just didn't ever feel like they were on the same page between ownership, the front office, and Arthur Smith in terms of the pieces that he needed. I don't know how you go 3 straight. Talk about the Steelers being patient at quarterback. How do you go 3 straight top 10 picks and come out of that with Desmond Ridder as your best option at quarterback? Like, that's just draft failure, right? And so he had all these luxury pieces that didn't fit his offense and weren't what he needed. And Pat Freiermuth improved his blocking down the stretch last year. I expect him to continue to do well. But when I look at what the Falcons did and how much they preferred to use Jonnu Smith over a clearly better athlete, better receiver, better route runner in Kyle Pitts, that screams to me like Darnell Washington is going to get some real run with this offense and get a real chance to show what he can do as not just a blocker and a receiver, and see the Steelers use a lot more 2 tight end stuff. If you look at the Falcons receiving last year, I mean, they barely used their 3rd receiver. And so I think you're going to see a lot more 2 tight end, a lot more 2 running back, and a lot less 3 receivers. So I think Pat Freiermuth will still do well, but if you're talking about a place where you could see a big jump, I think Darnell Washington is the guy.
Only 10 targets the entire season, caught 7 of them for 61 yards, and it was something where and also of those 7 catches, 4 of them for first downs.
Pitts and Jonnu Smith both had more targets than the 2nd Atlanta wide receiver.
Wow, that's crazy.
So like, you know, you could see a significant increase in the amount of offensive attention for Darnell Washington. I also think, you know, you will see that, you know, Bijan Robinson was 3rd. So it was London, Pitts, Robinson. So wow. I think you're going to see a lot of running back passes too. I think you're going to see Jaylen Warren, you know, and Najee Harris on the field at the same time. And with Warren as a a passing, primary, a receiving role when they're together. And certainly he's shown that he can do that. We talked a lot during the season that I thought that any combination of the Steelers' best 5 eligibles had to have 2 running backs on the field at the same time. And obviously you're trying not to wear them out. You don't want to play them all the whole game, but I didn't think they did nearly enough of that last year. I think we'll see more of that. I definitely think we're going to see more of 2 tight end.
If you see more of 2 running backs, do they need to go out and get a third running back just to be safe?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they and I also think they owe it to themselves to take another swing at the position, considering what's coming up in free agency, right? I mean, you have a 5th-year decision on Najee Harris that needs to be made this year, and I think it's more likely than not that they're going to pick that up, but he will be a for real free agent in the summer of 2025. Jaylen Warren will be a restricted free agent. Are they going to want to pour that, a significant amount of money into 2 guys at running back? Or might they prefer to pick one and have a second option that they could still lean on? I think it's incumbent on they can't just fill that 3rd running back spot with some 3rd-rate, washout, right? Like don't sign Leonard Fournette to be your 3rd running back this year, right? Go get someone with some real upside to see if they can become one of what you have in Harris and Warren, so that come 2025, you're not paying both of those guys.
Certainly, I think makes a lot of sense to add to that room with where you're at. So that, again, looking forward and ahead on contract considerations, that also needs to be in the plans just as much as addressing talent for the team that's going to take the field in 2024. He's Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Alan, thanks so much for joining us. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
At @Saunders_PGH on Twitter and all the other social medias. PGH Steelers Now is my site's account. SteelersNow.com. That's where my words live. And my podcast, Steelers Afternoon Drive, you can find here on YouTube or anywhere you find podcasts with me and Zachary Smith. All kinds of good stuff coming up. Got some good guests for the rest of this week, and then we're taking it to the Combine next week.
Awesome. We can't wait. I'll be there with Alan at the Combine next week. Thanks so much, Alan, for joining. Thank you all for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here every day, Monday through Friday, on the Locked On Steelers podcast, covering your Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see you here tomorrow, right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.